Welcome to the Compliance Experts podcast, hosted by Vartan Consultancy. Miles Vartan and his guests, as experts in compliance and risk management, will guide you carefully and with clarity through the many sectors of compliance like health and safety, ISO and operator licenses, and the complexity of customs regulations. They'll also be talking about the latest legislation, global trade news, and the hot topics as they happen.
So good morning, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Compliance Experts. Today, we're very lucky to get Tremayne Johnson with us, who's Director at Bartrums Haulage and Storage Limited in I. Tremayne and I have an incredibly comparable career history, which we're going to go into in a minute. And I think we've both learnt lessons from some icons in the industry. We're going to talk to Tremayne today about the driver situation in the UK, fuel, and then potential opportunities that are emerging rapidly in Suffolk and in the UK. And so, Tremayne, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Marv, and thanks for inviting me on. Good morning.
No, it's great. It's great to have you. We're a bit of a proponent of LinkedIn these days, and looking at your career history in LinkedIn, you started with Russell Davies Distribution.
Yes, absolutely. And initially that was on Felixstowe Dock, and I think that's where our paths sort of like
It
crossed.
was. No, they were, because so I am a little bit of background. So I was manager of Hull Freightliners. I was told one day Russell Davies were going to park trucks on my yard, which caused all sorts of problems with my staff, because something called Master Haul had just started, and they were very suspicious about the motives of Master Haul, where containers were carried and marketed to customers, transported by road and rail for our listeners. That is how I met John Williams, and John said to me, Miles, I'm going to set up a company called Russell Davies Distribution. Will you come down and manage it for me? So I ended up simultaneously actually being made redundant. So in the middle of the recession with Mrs. Thatcher, we were being made redundant, and I arrived in Duke Street in Ipswich, where we started Russell Davies Distribution. And I think not handed over the reins to you, Tremayne, but people like Charles Downey, who is now
of course, over at Blackton,
running at Bacton, Steve Cole, who has retired from the Seven Group. Characters like this were starting telling us what to do. Person who was we probably had to report to, maybe not directly every week, but was Glyn Davis. Glyn, now in his early 70s, is still working and making incredible changes in our industry and is still pioneering various areas.
Well, and just recently, Miles was clearly almost a deal maker, or it feels a bit like that, with the Kalina.
That's right. That's right. And Eddie Stobart. And so I understand, us having to report to him every Friday, just as computers were coming in. Now the four main managing directors within the Kalina group, and I think several from Stobart, all have to have a call with Glyn once a week.
Really?
Which will make them quake in their boots. Because his expectations is always that you tell him what you can achieve, and especially when it comes around for budget time. I don't know if you remember this. And he'd add 5% to everything he said. So you were already aspirational, and then he pushed you even further. I think with you then going to you ended up spent some time with the Barnard Group.
Yes, at a number of sites with Taylor Barnard, from Enfield, Wellingborough, Mendlesham, and Wellesbourne.
Yeah. So the Davises and the Barnards, and then you had Colin Carter, various other luminaries who are still with us. This area must have become it was a real hotbed for sort of cutting edge logistics, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's interesting in as much as that you've got some very successful family-owned or privately owned national logistics company, and two of which, really were Taylor Barnard and Russell Davies. But I don't think it would be possible to say in the 90s and the early 2000s that Suffolk itself was significant in logistics terms. But that's changed. And, what I'm seeing now in the last 5 years is a real rush. And, the kind of constructions that we've got in place at the moment in respect of Suffolk Park at Bury St Edmunds, Gateway 14 at Stowmarket, and then there's a number of different developments in Ipswich. Logistically, the face of Suffolk is really a different place now. And, once some of these parks get completed, it's going to be quite amazing just to see the infrastructure that Suffolk has in logistics terms that just wasn't in existence when you and me were operating in the 80s or 90s.
That's right. I mean, I think there were probably single-figure trains leaving Felixstowe every day.
Yeah.
With containers. They're now up to 33. Every day, 400 plus tons of containers leaving the port. So I think it's somewhere towards 28-29% of all the containers coming through Felixstowe leave the port by rail.
When I was growing up in Suffolk, initially it was the A45. That then got superseded by the A14. But in many ways, Suffolk was a place where the ships docked, and Suffolk was a place where the trucks or trains rolled through to get where they wanted to go, which was, your Golden Triangle type areas in the Midlands. And that's changing, Miles, and it's changing fast. And Suffolk now seems to me to be a place where businesses, are choosing to do business and choosing to have stock holdings.
Definitely.
And, and that's fantastic. And that's good for everybody.
And part of that will relate to port-centric logistics. So the pallet carriers of which you're one yourself, aren't you?
A Pallet Track. It's one of the newer ones. We were a founding member. Amazingly, on some months, we would be the biggest transactor of palletized freight in that network, which is surprising that a Suffolk-based haulier would manage to make that number one or number two spot.
So if containers can be brought to you from the port, which is only a matter of miles, then devanned into your warehousing and distributed pushed on from there. Cost per pallet around the UK is pretty much the same as it would be if it was done from the Midlands. But you're cutting out that expensive container leg to and from the Midlands, aren't you? So.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously we're at a slight disadvantage compared to some of the operators that are either on the port itself or just outside, but we're still close enough that, on any given day, there are Felixstowe containers on site unloading into our warehouse, which is fantastic. And that's a real benefit from being in Suffolk.
Are you doing any developments on the port or working with other companies on the port, Tremayne?
Infrastructure developments, no. For a few months now, we've effectively operated an office in Felixstowe, but bricks and mortar, no. 2022 is hopefully going to be a significant year for Bartrums, and for a few months now, we've been sat on planning application for a new warehouse at which is where we're headquartered, just getting started on that. And that's a big development for us. And that's not a lease deal. That's, we're going to build it, which is great. And certainly, in my short time at Bartrums, what I would say about this business is that it's more geared towards buying things and owning assets, whether they're trucks, trailers, or warehouses, than leasing them. And there are some companies that in reality don't own too much. Very successful companies, and I won't take that away from them, but most of what they have as assets are leased assets.
Exactly. Now, I want to get to talking about the famous Yasmin, who,
yes.
and also all these issues being faced to us with drivers and fuel. But you talked about assets, and you and I both worked for Russell Davies when they pitched for the Dixons business. And there's some analogies here to another big project, which we haven't mentioned yet, which is going to be Sizewell.
Yes.
So I think we've already seen almost a little bit of a prescriptive situation going on where people are going to be asked to tender for certain situations at Sizewell in relation to logistical support, similar to the way that Russell Davies Distribution and Russell Davies Limited were asked to quote for the Dixons. And I was quite involved with that. And I remember Glyn Davis being told by Dixons that, right, here's all our equipment, here's all our delivery points, and can you just give us a comparable price, please? And Glyn said, well, can I be a bit innovative? And they said, no, let's just give us a comparable price and we'll see where we are. Now, one of the conversations he had with a director at Dixons was that Glyn asked, why have you got tandem axle trailers? And they said, well, we can't get tri-axle trailers into all our stores. And So Glyn went to one of his, or couple of his Generation 1 drivers from Russell Davies and said, here, take a triaxle trailer. Here are the addresses of all the Dixon stores. I want the two of you to come back and tell me if there's any that you can't get a triaxle trailer into. And they came back, and as you can imagine, they said, no, I said, Doddle, we got ours in everywhere.
Yeah.
So he was able to go to Dixon's and say, right, I know you asked me to quote on these principles and against these requirements, but did you know that we can get a triaxle trailer into every one of your depot, which means for the same number of vehicles, we can deliver this many more pallets.
Mm.
Hence, your cost per pallet is going to go down.
Yeah.
They were amazed, and I think it's one of the key things that swung the deal.
Sure.
And I'm a real, having spent since 1987 worked in this area, and knowing all the people that were spawned out of Russell Davies, so your Matthew Ashworth and Charles Downey. Some of these people are retired now, obviously, but Tim Foreman. They've all been successful in their businesses because they as Glyn mentions, and this will probably be the last time we say his name, but they learned how to drink diesel.
Sure.
But not only that, and you're doing this at Bartrums as well, developing the business in sort of really innovative ways. So being able to look critically at what customers are asking you to do and come back with really innovative solutions.
Sure.
It's almost like a statement rather than a question, but feel free to say.
Yeah, I think, no business, this is a service industry. When we start talking about Bartrums or some of our competitors in East Anglia, whether that's Bacton, obviously you mentioned Charles earlier, and I've got a huge amount of respect for Charles and for Bacton Transport. It's very easy to say, that's trucks and trailers, it's haulage. The way that I prefer to view what we do, it's a service industry. We're providing a service. And I think if we get too bogged down with, it's just trucks and, it's taking stuff from A to B, it's very easy to lose sight of the customer and all of that.
Definitely.
And at the end of it, there is a customer at both ends, really, that is expecting that service. And that's the way that I really try and focus on this business. We're providing a service. What services does the customer want, rather than just necessarily rocking up and saying, right, we've got more trucks than most. We can get all your stuff from A to B. Let's get started. Yeah, that's certainly my view anyway.
And I bet you do it in an innovative way too. So you're always suggesting better ways in which things can be done. Let's move on to fuel, Tremayne. We're reading in the press every day about what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, which is having an direct effect on the price of fuel. We're filling up our cars, seeing the price of both diesel and petrol go through the roof. I've got a loan car outside, which is a Toyota Yaris, and it's a hybrid. I'm just stunned that it's saying I'm getting 60 miles per gallon average out of my fuel tank. It's a combination of using less fuel and more electric. How are Bartrums? How's this affecting your business, and how do you think industry is sort of adapting to cope with what could be quite a long-term trend?
Yeah, I mean it's obviously incredibly topical. I mean, if we just start to paint a picture, shall we say? So the RHA publish weekly and monthly averages, and I think let's start with that. So March 2021, so 1 year ago, their published bulk diesel price was 97.5 pence.
Is it really? Wow.
So that was 1 year back. Today, last week's was 150.93, so 151, and that's a 54% uplift in 1 year, and that's very hard to cope with. And I think the really interesting thing is that at the top of the logistics food chain, you've got DHL, Seaver, XPO, Wincanton. Those businesses won't conduct any element of UK haulage that isn't underpinned and backed with a surcharge, an escalator. Yeah, they don't, and they won't. And there is governance mechanisms within those businesses to ensure that they don't. So at the very, very top, a 54% uplift in fuel, it isn't particularly a risk for those businesses because they're protected and they've taken sensible steps to protect themselves. And they're in positions where they can do that because, again, most of what they do, if not all of what they do, is through contracts.
Mm.
As you move further down the food chain in the UK and the size of the businesses to medium-sized hauliers like Bartrums and right down to, let's say an owner-driver, the situation is more mixed. And very definitely at the start of 2022, there would be a huge amount of exposure and risk where businesses were operating without escalator mechanisms. And Bartrums was one of those. And we had an awful lot of business where to tackle a fuel increase of that magnitude, it meant speaking to a customer and saying, look, we need to move to a different rate card. We need to do this. We need to do that, rather than just a automated process where an escalator does it for you. And, we've successfully, and, with the help of our customer base, who've been incredibly supportive, we've moved to a position now where we're covered and, we have escalators in place. As we go further down to the smaller companies, they're the ones that I think I worry about more. And, an owner operator is much less likely to have a formal escalator in place. And there's a huge amount of risk. And it means that he's having to speak to his customers week in, week out and try and address this soaring inflation on fuel, which is, there was a 5p reduction on duty. So that came in, 1,800 hours last week on the 23rd, I think it was. Realistically, we've yet to really witness any sort of impact of that. And I think it just got soaked up. I'm not seeing any impact. I just hope that it doesn't go beyond where it is now.
I imagine there must still be, in terms of the supply side, there must be, and different fuel card providers.
Again, topical. Yeah.
People will be coming up with innovative proposals that will try and give them an edge.
Yeah. I mean, aside from tackling, reducing and eliminating the risk, what we're also seeing, and I'm sure this is, for everybody else in the business, some real issues with actually buying diesel. Because of the kind of business we are, we've got a big tank on site. So we buy bulk diesel for that in 36,000 litre deliveries. And our trucks also have cards to buy fuel on the road. And on both, we are finding it hard to transact. And that's hard to buy diesel. You've probably heard of HVO. We even had to buy HVO, I think it was a week back. It wasn't really our choice. And at the moment, we are looking at our procurement for diesel, for site and through cards. And it could be that we do something slightly different. I don't want to preempt it because the decisions haven't been made. But aside from securing at the best possible price, we need to be confident that we can get diesel. There was a real shortage at the back end of last year. About the only thing that saved us was the fact that we were sat on such a colossal stock to start with. But it got close. And we need fuel. And it's under pressure at the moment, price and availability.
We had I can remember when would it have been? So late 90s, early 20th century, when there was a fuel strike, and we had to come up with innovative ways at Green King, which I will not disclose on these networks, as to how we got our vehicles refueled.
I remember it well. I was at Taylor Barnard at the time. It's your business. If Green King had stopped delivering beer, we would have just run out of capacity in Bury St Edmunds for storage.
For storage, and they would have stopped production. And don't think Green King, in my knowledge, ever lost a day's production. They've always produced every day since all that time. So, Yasmin Jobs applied for a job at Bartrums.
Yeah, she's a single mother, and we happen to have a flyer inside the nursery that said, come and work at Bartrums. And it also touched on the training scheme, because we've got an in-house ability to train drivers from scratch, which, that really helped us out last year. It was a game changer for us. So I think Yasmin saw that flyer, whether immediately or after a few days, but I think she then got in touch with that side of our business. She had a head start, in actual fact. So she wasn't starting from scratch, and, her background was equestrian.
Yeah.
And she'd got certain qualifications for moving horses around in the horse box, which meant that really what we did with Yasmin was finish off her qualifications, and it didn't take much. From memory, she passed first time, and that was to get her Class 2 or LGV2 license, Category C. Since then, she expressed an interest in doing her C+E Class 1. That was last year. Again, she passed first time. Amazing.
Yes, yeah.
At the moment, she isn't choosing to do a whole lot of Class 1. That might change, but right now, her preference is Class 2. And if this makes sense, when you're on the palletized network, you tend to take ownership for a number of postcodes. So she has an area, which is a local area. I is part of her patch. And she almost gets to know, the businesses and.
Oh, no, 100%. Yeah, I can really. At Green King, we did the same. We the drivers had their own routes, so every week they would go to the same. They would go to the same pubs every week.
Yeah.
I remember I would every now and again I would don my drayman's uniform and go out with them.
Yeah.
And the relationship that the landladies and the landlords had with the drivers was phenomenal. There was names, I will not mention names here, but I arrived at 7:30 in a pub somewhere in the middle of Suffolk, and the landlady said, "Hello, Quinny, morning." And he said, "Hello." And she said, "What do you want to drink?" And a cup of tea, please. And she asked his mate, and he said, "A cup of coffee with 1 sugar, please." And she stuck her head round the corner and looked at me, and she went, "Oh, and you'll have a cup of coffee too." But they would, I mean, it's almost an exaggeration, but they literally would buy the lottery tickets for them. They would know, so Yasmin is going to develop this fantastic relationship with her customers.
She has, and I think her media profile in 2021 was quite exceptional. A lot of her patch are very aware of Bartrums as a business. It's been going since 1929. So the rapport and the relationship was fantastic. And I think owning certain postcodes isn't something that we can easily replicate on the Arctic side of the business.
No.
And I think that's given her some food for thought. And I think right now, I think she's happy with what she's doing.
So with her 18-tonner she's driving, or maybe even smaller.
It is an 18, I think. Yeah.
With an 18-tonner, is she? So she's pretty much a day driver.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Has she got any views about the facilities that the UK provide drivers for staying out overnight? Would she?
I don't think Yasmin would. No. Right now we've got 5 female drivers.
Right.
3 of which are on the palletized side of the business, like Yasmin. And then a couple on general haulage who are trampers as well. So these are ladies that are roving up and down the UK, living in their truck. And a lot of them, because of the geography, a lot of Bartrums trampers would leave on a Monday morning or a Sunday night and come back Friday afternoon or Saturday morning.
Yeah.
And spend the entire week out. What I'd say, Miles, is that, whether you're male or female, I'm pretty certain, and I do talk to them, that the opinion would be the same, and that's that UK facilities are inadequate, pretty woeful, and could be improved a whole lot. And having a bunk in the truck, having a nice truck with a night heater and, microwave and fridge, which ours do. And anything that we've been buying now for a couple of years has such things. But at the end of the day, you need somewhere to have a wash and even better to get a hot meal. The options are pretty limited.
When I was at Green King, we met a company called Treasures.
Yes, yeah, Peter.
Peter Greenhalgh at Treasures, and they moved all our beer. So they even took our used malt away to Marmite and things like this. So they
up in Burton,
and they were members of and probably still are actually members of the Transport Association.
Yeah. Now, well, funny enough, Peter recently, I think it was last year, he was voted onto the steering board, and I think he's currently vice president.
Yeah,
pretty sure.
his father was very involved with it as well, Gary.
Yeah, I've met the dad.
Yeah,
really nice. Got a huge amount of respect for both.
Oh, same here. I mean,
so I've
amazing.
I've talked to the Bartrum family about the TA because, funny enough, whilst Russell Davis weren't members of the TA, Taylor Barnard were. We're currently giving it some thought, and I think it's a worthwhile organisation for sure. And there's a lot of cooperation and collaboration, and I'd quite like us to join. So we'll see about that.
So as we were talking there, I immediately thought about. I started to think about could a network like the Transport Association, so individually, I think predominantly family-owned businesses, some very large. Preston's of Potto. I've met Mrs. Preston several times. You've got Ferguson's. You've got Treasures. You've got all sorts of people. I mean, bless him, Duncan Adams, who isn't with us anymore, but Duncan Adams was a member of the Transport Association. I was wondering, Tremayne, about the potential of members of this type of association creating their own driver facilities. But driver facilities that would be up and notch driver facilities. So you'd have a network across the country where drivers, and you may be able to go make them available to hauliers outside the Transport Association, but create quality driver stops, safe areas to park.
Yeah. So certainly I can say with confidence that the environment over the last couple of years was not a good one for sharing facilities, and I'm talking about the pandemic. We're sort of coming away from that now. And, if you remember at the height, there were even petrol stations that had locked their toilets and would not let, and some of the horror stories that we were reading and seeing and, hearing back from our drivers, they desperately needed a toilet and just could not find one. So we're moving out of that now. From memory, and obviously I really haven't been involved with the TA since I left Taylor Barnard, which would have been around about 2000, 2001. Aside from sharing fuel, which I think they did, and they allowed members to fuel from each other.
Yes.
I think parking was also part of that arrangement. So, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they're talking about it. It needs investment, and right now, if I'm going to be honest, our own facilities in terms of if you were to park overnight at our place, obviously, which our own drivers don't do, they're not the best, but we're looking to spend some money on them. We've had some quotes, and we're looking at refurbishing our facilities. But yeah, I mean, it's an obvious step. But certainly from a commercial perspective, there are a number of truck stops up and down, and the kind of food and the facilities in some of these truck stops aren't the best.
No.
But it's just trying to lead the industry to invest.
I did a presentation last week to the British Association of Dangerous Goods Professionals in Coventry.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It was entitled "How Secure Is Your Supply Chain?" And I found some incredible statistics about the number of drivers who park overnight off-site. And in the Midlands, it was something, I can't remember the total figures, but something like 27% of trucks in the Midlands park off-site overnight.
Yeah,
and direct correlation between the percentages of the proportion of parking off-site and the amount of crime in that area. So these drivers are targeted, and there seems to be a very dodgy line now between how much they're going to target the driver as well as trying to steal the fuel or the cargo. I mean, Road Haulage Association reported recently about drivers being gassed.
I remember seeing stuff a couple of years, and certainly on the continent as well, I've seen that. I've lost fuel. Fuel obviously is significantly a more valuable target now than it was a year ago. So we're seeing efforts to steal fuel. We haven't had a trailer break-in for certainly more than a year, which is good news. And, security is a big thing. It really is. And, if we're talking earlier about female drivers, We've only got 2 that tramp, but these are ladies that are up and down the country in truck stops and wherever, 4 or 5 nights a week.
It would be interesting sometime in the future. Maybe we could get one of them on this pod talk.
Yeah.
We had a Lithuanian driver from Felixstowe explaining to us all the why the numbers of drivers, a significant number of drivers went back to Europe and have no intention of going back to the UK. So if we could maybe get one of them on to share their tales about how maybe things could be improved. I do know that there are some people locally to us who are seriously looking at investing money in truck stops. As I see it, as partly as a real opportunity. So it's somewhere where you're going to be quite happy to pay for a decent meal, but there'll be some margin in the food and the facilities. 100%, yeah. And land is not cheap, and there's not a lot of land around these days. So we've got Sizewell C, which you've been to a conference a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
And they're looking for 1.3 million square meters of warehousing, readily adjacent to Sizewell.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of available warehouse space in Suffolk right now, quite honestly, there isn't any.
No.
The inquiries that I get every week are just quite amazing and unprecedented. And certainly, I'm having the kind of conversations now that I don't think would ever have taken place.
No.
And almost inquiries that are prefaced with, I know it's probably a no, but I've got to ask, is there any warehouse space? Have you heard of any? Do you know anyone? Is there anything you could do?
Yeah.
And I think it will alleviate itself. But the biggest challenges I think that are going on right now, Miles, is warehousing space in Suffolk and fuel.
Exactly.
Quite honestly, the driver shortage certainly from our perspective, and yes, we've invested a lot of money in training, but we haven't really got a driver shortage at the moment, certainly here.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a much higher percentage of drivers who are what you would call inexperienced, let's say less than 2 years experience. And that, again, is unprecedented. We would never have operated with that kind of percentage that we have in place now. But, that's an output of the training that we've done. So I don't necessarily see it as a negative. It's just the reality of the situation that to get ourselves out of where we were and where everybody were last year, we needed to train drivers.
Exactly. I had a conversation last night with a number of people at a supply chain supper in Copdock.
Yeah.
And there's a big warehouse provider there from just up the A14, and he was explaining to me that the capacity problem is being accentuated by the cost of living. So people's stock holdings are just rising.
Yeah.
The demand on for outward going goods is dropping off as people are being quite reluctant to spend their money because their fuel costs at home are doubling, if not more.
Would also point to the fact that there is a huge amount of government-related PPE under storage in Suffolk right now. And whether that's Felixstowe, Ipswich, further along with us, I wouldn't hazard a guess as to how many pallets, but it's going to be a very big number. And that's taking up a fair amount of space that just didn't exist 2 years ago.
And I'll tell you what, that's going to be a problem, isn't it? Because if you take off your yellow jacket and look inside, you've got a CE mark on it.
Yeah.
So come 2024, January 2024, it's got to be a UK CA mark. And these PPE provide manufacturers are going to end up with a whole load of stock on their hands, which they can't sell.
I think
they certainly can't export anyway. So
I think we're there now, Miles. And I think, again, anecdotally, hearing evidence of stock that's gone past its sell-by date or stock that is no longer fit for use or not in line with the specification that the folks need, which is a bit of a worry. So I don't know where all that ends up. But certainly there is sizable storage of PPE in Suffolk that's exacerbating a problem that I think was there anyway.
So we're both of a certain age, me being older than you.
52 yesterday.
And we've talked about all these issues, and we've our sentences go from one issue to another issue. I know the whole family at Bartrums, and they'll be very pleased to have you on board. And a number of them will be looking to you for direction and advice. And at the same time, we're talking locally now about collaborative working to go for Sizewell, getting large businesses working together, partly so that the purchasers of the transport can be happy about the risk management side of it. And the size of the contract isn't going to put them at risk by, one business going out of business and then being left holding the baby type thing. A huge. I'd be interested to hear from you about, like, within Bartrums, how you develop strategies, but also, and it will all be about having quality people working for you, and getting feedback from drivers and talking closely to your customers. But I mean, I involved Bartrums in a consortium in Felixstowe when we were closing down FinTransit. So Bartrums, Culvers, Debich, Bacton. Bacton weren't around then as what they are now, but we got everybody together working as a consortium. I remember the first meeting that everybody sat around the table and didn't really want to talk to each other early one Monday morning. And it suddenly occurred to me that they spent their whole life trying to put the others out of business. So it was, there wasn't going to be a lot of family spirited conversations around the table, but we got it to work in the end. And your wide span of experience would be really, and I think listeners would be really interested to hear from you how you get your new ideas, how you develop them. Do you work with other hauliers? You're part of a network. Are you part of a network in addition to the Paddock network, Tremayne?
We were part of Jigsaw. So when you started talking about consortiums, Miles, I immediately thought, Jigsaw. Obviously, Jigsaw has effectively evolved into and been bought by EV Cargo. Mm-hmm. So in real terms, I don't think Jigsaw is now what it was. I'm not, what I'd say, certainly locally, there's a huge amount of respect. There's no doubt about that. And I'm talking about from hauliers to other hauliers. And I'm not seeing really any level of animosity or attempts to undermine each other. I get on at a personal level, quite well with a lot of the senior guys and girls, in places like Bacton, whether it's Anglia Freight, actual full-on collaboration. But, Sizewell C, that is a fantastically exciting project, massively. It's got my fullest support. Yes, I've been to some of the meetings. I think there's some more coming up. And, if Bartrums can, Bartrums will have a part to play in.
A role to play in that, yeah.
Delivering Sizewell C. Certainly that's my desire, and that's shared across the ownership of this business. In terms of strategy, what I'd say about Bartrums is, it started off life very much as a transport-oriented business.
Yeah.
That initially was to take produce from Norfolk and Suffolk to London. I've even got, in my, believe it or not, in my office right now, I've got some of the ledgers from very early days because I wanted to see if we were working with company or not. And I've got a 1947, 1948 ledger, which shows everything that we were doing. Then the business started branching out, and you've touched on, our palletized network. We've got a full-scale in-house workshops. So, we service our own trucks, trailers, the whole lot. We don't farm that out. We do our own training. There's a Bartrums training department. The thing that I've attempted to steer this business more towards is contract logistics, warehousing, and palletized racked warehousing. And, right now we've got a bit less than 200,000 square foot of warehousing. We're not major providers of racked warehousing. And that's something that, we're in the process of changing. And I think, certainly by next year, we'll have more than we do now. And having that offer opens this business out to a different type of customer. A lot of our warehousing is bulk storage. And that's great. And it's got a place, and it's, I don't want us to push away from that, but I think having more rack warehousing will complement what we've got, and it will enable a different type of strategy. And that's a work in progress at the moment.
We've spoken a little bit about your driver training side. Do you take young people into the business who have got an interest in logistics full stop? And then enabling you to promote from within and achieve some sustainability that way, and providing like local employment for kids so they get to understand the industry.
So we have apprenticeship schemes. So I think that probably covers off that. Beyond the apprenticeship schemes, there's no formal Bartrums grad program, if you like. Whether we're big enough for that, I don't know. It's certainly, it's an interesting suggestion there. And then obviously what we do have is what we would call the DTS scheme, and that's the driver training scheme.
Yeah.
Almost to enable it. And it's paid off, really. At the start of last year, what we had as a business, we've got about 150 wheeled assets, and that's from rigids. You mentioned 18-tonners earlier. We've got 26-tonners, and then through to the Arctic fleet, which operate predominantly curtain-siders, but we've got bulk haulage as well. But really, it was one or the other. It was Arctic or rigid. And to really allow a training scheme to flourish, what you need is something a bit less than a rigid. And we've invested last year, and then we've now got vans, curtain-sided vans, but something that, you or I could just hop into. And obviously we've both got
I'd be trusted with.
But it makes it more doable. It makes it more doable. And it is a bit less scary for someone that's just coming out of a car to be in a van. And these are vans that are operated commercially, but it gives us that sort of a better flow from a van to a rigid and then an Arctic.
Exactly, and we're not far away from these vans being tachographed either, are we? So
exactly,
drivers are going to be getting used to driver's hours, young people. But I know that if you woke up locally and you're 16 years old in East Anglia and you decide you want to get further education, you want to look at some sort of transport qualification, there aren't many about.
It's a shame.
Further education colleges don't seem to get to either have the impetus to create the course or can find enough interest in it, So
yeah, I mean, do you know what? This was in my previous employment at DHL. I was invited by a local college who were doing a careers day. This was about 5 years ago, and they said, would I go and speak? Yeah, absolutely. And a bit nearer the time, so I'd been getting all the collateral and, we'd got some good stuff to take with us. And a couple of 3 days beforehand, she phoned me up and she said, I am so sorry, Tremayne, but not a single student wants to come to your logistics session.
Yeah.
And it, it wasn't me, it wasn't the company, because obviously DHL is a recognizable company. It was just a complete and utter lack of appetite within that entire college.
Exactly,
school.
And I think, seriously, this is going to become a problem. The industry has got to find a way of getting young people involved. I know I spoke to John Williams at Maritime about 3 years ago, and he was being quite successful in getting younger people in to be traffic operators.
Yeah.
But they didn't really get it. They were very much driven by what they were being paid, what the rewards are, what came with the package. And they didn't understand about looking after drivers or much more beyond themselves. So, but unless we can get more people in, then you're going to find, I know some of the characters who work at Bartrums who I've got immense respect for, and they've been there years and years and years, and you'd be stuck without them. But I think we do need to find a way of getting younger people in.
If you look around traffic offices in the UK, quite often a greater than 50% of those office-based staff will have migrated from truck driving.
Right.
It's either because they wanted to, because they saw it as a step forward, or because they had a family and didn't want to be away at night. But what you don't have a huge abundance of is people leaving school saying that they want to get into logistics. And that needs tackling. We need to make it more attractive and just something that people see as a worthwhile endeavour.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and you've referred to it several times. Yasmin gets great fulfillment out of her job into relating with her customers. People on your traffic desk will do the same. They'll have their own customers and get to know them very well. So there's great things to be able to get out of you got job security. Just something that it's almost like a family, and it is. Bartrums is a family.
Earlier this week, we sat down with all the office-based staff for annual review. And it was a two-way thing, It was obviously we'd got some things to tell them, but it was a really opportune moment to understand how they feel about life, how they feel about Bartrums. And almost unanimously, the message back was that they felt like they were in a genuine team, felt that they were supported from their colleagues and also the business at large. And they liked what they did. And someone, one particular chappie was talking about, in the car on the way to work, that's quite a critical time. And you're either driving to work thinking, it's another day, but, there's only 2 left. I just don't want to do this. And he said, I'm in the car and actually I'm really looking forward to being here because I have fun. I talk some.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it gives the chance, maybe we could sort of close on this, but good teams provide good service.
Yes.
It's
about service, Miles. Yeah.
Exactly. People in teams, in good teams, feel looked after, they get job fulfillment. So the customers who we're all working for, if they get excellent levels of service, then you feel the love as a supplier. And you get the opportunity. There's a lot of trust there, and it's a great thing. So it's been a great talking to you after all these years. I mustn't. Just before I stopped last time, I mustn't forget several of my staff send their best regards to you, having worked with you in the past.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
And thank you very much. So for everybody listening to this podcast, if you'd like to come on the podcast, please let us know. If there are any subjects you'd like us to talk about, please let us know. This will be going out on all the usual channels, and we'll be promoting it via social media. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Tremayne, and have a good day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Compliance Experts podcast. We highly value your input and welcome any questions, thoughts or challenges for us to tackle in forthcoming episodes. Vartan Consultancy pride themselves in helping customers manage risk and subsequently helping them improve their overall company performance. To speak to Miles and his team, visit vartanconsultancy.com. This podcast is produced and managed by podtalk.co.uk and is the copyright of Vartan Consultancy. This podcast is created for entertainment purposes only. Views and opinions are that of Vartan Consultancy and their guests. Information recorded in this episode was deemed correct at the time of recording. However, we advise you to always check with Vartan Consultancy for up-to-date information and legislation.